Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your entire plantation has disappeared overnight. It wasn't a fire, it wasn't a storm, it wasn't conventional pests. It was millions of tiny soldiers working tirelessly while you slept, carrying away piece by piece your source of income on their backs. This is the reality faced by thousands of farmers around the world, victims of one of the most organized and destructive insects on the planet, leafcutter ants. In the interior of São Paulo, Brazil, rural producer João Mendes lost 40% of his eucalyptus plantation in just 2 weeks. When he arrived in the morning to check his seedlings, he found entire rows of plants completely defoliated, with only bare stems pointing to the sky like plant skeletons. The ground was covered with perfectly organized trails where millions of leafcutter ants carried green fragments toward gigantic anthills that looked like underground cities. This scene repeats daily on farms, orchards, and plantations throughout Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, and other tropical and subtropical countries of the Americas. Leafcutter ants, mainly species known as saúvas and quenquens, represent one of the greatest threats to modern agriculture, causing estimated damages of billions of dollars annually. To understand the magnitude of this problem, we need to know our adversary. Leafcutter ants are not ordinary insects. They have developed over millions of years a sophisticated agricultural system that would make any engineer envious. These small creatures do not directly consume the leaves they cut. Instead, they cultivate fungi inside their nests, using the cut plant material as substrate to feed these underground plantations. It is literally miniature agriculture, practiced by insects that existed long before humans discovered agriculture. A single colony of leafcutter ants can house between 5 to 8 million individuals, organized in specific castes with well-defined functions. The smaller workers take care of the fungus gardens, the medium-sized ones transport the cut material, and the largest ones, with powerful mandibles, are responsible for cutting leaves and defending the colony. This division of labor allows a colony to process tons of plant material per year. The economic impact is devastating. In Brazil, the main country affected by these insects, it is estimated that leafcutter ants annually destroy the equivalent of feeding 25 million adult cattle. In citrus plantations in Florida, producers report losses of up to 60% of their newly planted seedlings. In Costa Rica, entire coffee farms are abandoned due to the impossibility of controlling these pests. Maria Elena Rodriguez, a coffee producer in Colombia, describes the feeling of helplessness when seeing decades of work being destroyed. You plant, you care, you invest time and money, and suddenly everything disappears. It's like fighting against an invisible army that never sleeps, never stops working. Her farm, which produced 2 tons of coffee per hectare, had production reduced to just 400 kilos after successive attacks by leafcutter ants. The problem worsens because these ants are extremely selective and intelligent. They can identify young and healthy plants, preferentially attacking seedlings and tender shoots, precisely the most valuable parts of plantations. Moreover, they can travel distances of up to 200 meters from their nests to find ideal food, creating trails that connect multiple rural properties. The adaptation capacity of these insects is impressive. When farmers change the type of crop planted, the ants quickly adapt to new food options. When pesticides are applied, colonies develop alternative routes or modify their activity schedules. When physical barriers are installed, they find creative ways to circumvent them. What makes this problem even more complex is the social structure of the colonies. Unlike other agricultural pests that can be controlled by attacking individuals, leafcutter ants operate as a superorganism. Killing thousands of workers on the surface does not solve the problem, as the queen continues reproducing underground, protected by layers of earth and defended by specialized soldiers. The nests can reach depths of up to 8 meters and extend over areas equivalent to football fields. Within this complex structure, there are specific chambers for fungus cultivation, garbage deposits, nurseries for larvae, and even ventilation systems that maintain ideal temperature and humidity for colony development. This is just the tip of the iceberg of a problem that is intensifying due to climate change and the expansion of agricultural frontiers. Leafcutter ants are finding new territories to colonize and new food sources to exploit, putting even more pressure on rural producers who already face numerous economic and environmental challenges. For decades, the war between farmers and leafcutter ants was fought with heavy chemical weapons and strategies that looked more like military combat than agricultural management. The first control methods were brutal and desperate. Producers poured diesel oil into anthills and set them on fire, creating underground infernos that often spread uncontrollably. Others soaked the nests with extremely toxic insecticides, poisoning not only the ants but also the soil and groundwater. Carlos Mendana, a veteran farmer from Minas Gerais, remembers the old methods with a mixture of nostalgia and horror. In the 80s, we didn't have much knowledge. It was real war. We used liquid ant poison, threw kilos of poison into the holes. We even used gasoline. The result was farms that looked like battlefields, with smoking craters and a chemical smell that lasted weeks. The chemical industry responded to demand by creating increasingly sophisticated arsenals. Granulated ant poisons emerged, promising to be more effective and less aggressive to the environment. The most common active ingredient was sulfluramide, a substance that workers carried into the nest along with leaf pieces, contaminating the fungus gardens and, theoretically, the entire colony. Roberto Silva, an agricultural engineer specialized in pest control, explains the logic behind these products. The idea was to use the ants' own behavior against them. Since they take everything inside the anthill to feed the fungi, we just had to mix the poison with attractive material. The ants themselves would do the work of distributing the pesticide throughout the entire colony. Initially, the results seemed promising. Farms reported significant reductions in ant activity after applying granulated ant poisons. The industry celebrated, farmers regained hope, and the market for leafcutter ant pesticides moved millions of dollars annually. However, nature is more intelligent than we imagined. After some years of intensive use, concerning reports began to emerge. Ant hills that had been treated returned to normal activity within months. Colonies seemed to develop resistance to active ingredients. Worse still, the environmental effects of pesticides began to manifest alarmingly. The most shocking discovery came through environmental studies conducted in areas of intensive sulfluramide application. Researchers found pesticide residues in rivers and springs located kilometers away from treated farms. Predatory birds showed lethal concentrations of the substance in their tissues. Beneficial insects, essential for pollination and natural control of other pests, were disappearing from treated regions. Dr. Amanda Ferreira, a biologist specialized in ecotoxicology, conducted a study that revealed the magnitude of the problem. Sulfluramide is an extremely persistent molecule in the environment. It does not degrade easily and accumulates in the food chain. We discovered that a single application in an anthill can contaminate the local ecosystem for more than 5 years. The situation became even more complicated when the ants themselves began to demonstrate sophisticated adaptive behaviors. Colonies began to reject baits that had been accepted previously. Some species developed workers specialized in detecting contaminated food, creating a kind of natural quality control that filtered material before taking it to the fungus gardens. Marcos Oliveira, a soybean producer in Mato Grosso, witnessed this evolution on his property. It was impressive and scary at the same time. At first, the ants would take any bait you put out. After a few years, they began to completely ignore the ant poisons. It was as if they had learned to identify the poison. The resistance was not only behavioral, but also physiological. Laboratory analyses revealed that some populations of leafcutter ants developed enzymes capable of metabolizing pesticides more rapidly, drastically reducing their effectiveness. This phenomenon, known as enzymatic resistance, became a nightmare for the chemical industry and farmers. Simultaneously, regulatory pressure increased exponentially. Environmental agencies began restricting the use of various active ingredients, especially sulfluramide, due to proven environmental risks. The European Union was a pioneer in banning substances considered persistent and bioaccumulative, creating trade barriers for Brazilian agricultural products that showed residues of these compounds. Economic pressure intensified when large supermarket chains and international importers began demanding certifications guaranteeing the absence of certain pesticides in food. Producers who depended on the export market were forced to abandon control methods they had used for decades. In this crisis scenario, a fundamental question arose that would completely change the approach to the problem. What if we were fighting the wrong way? What if, instead of trying to eliminate leafcutter ants, we could find ways to coexist with them, or even use them to our advantage? This paradigm shift did not happen overnight. It was the result of decades of scientific research, careful observation, and mainly the wisdom of farmers who began to see the problem from a completely different perspective. The transformation began quietly in rural university laboratories and in the fields of visionary farmers who dared to question decades of conventions. Dr. Luiz Carlos Forte, from São Paulo State University, was one of the pioneers of this conceptual revolution. Instead of focusing on eliminating leafcutter ants, he began to study their behavior deeply, seeking to understand the natural vulnerabilities of these superorganisms. We realized we were trying to kill an organism that evolved for 50 million years to be practically indestructible, explains the researcher. It was like trying to put out the sun with a spray bottle. We needed to change our strategy completely. The first revolutionary discovery came from studying the fungus gardens. Leafcutter ants depend totally on a specific species of fungus for their survival. This fungus, in turn, is extremely sensitive to contamination by other microorganisms. Nature had created a delicate balance that could be exploited intelligently. Researchers discovered that certain bacteria and competing fungi could be introduced into the ants' gardens through special baits, causing gradual collapse of food production within the colony. Unlike chemical pesticides, these biological agents did not cause immediate death but rather slow deterioration that forced the ants to abandon the location and migrate to areas distant from plantations. Dr. Maria Santana, an entomologist specialized in biological control, developed specific strains of trichoderma, a beneficial fungus that competes directly with the fungus cultivated by ants. The beauty of this strategy is that we use nature's own control mechanisms. The ants take our biological agent inside the nest, thinking it's food, but they're actually introducing a competitor that will gradually take over the gardens. Simultaneously, other researchers discovered that certain plants produce natural chemical compounds that interfere with ant chemical communication. Eucalyptus, citronella, neem, and various Brazilian native species release substances that confuse the pheromones used by ants to mark trails and coordinate activities. José Roberto Campos, a pioneer in regenerative agriculture, brilliantly implemented this discovery on his farm in the interior of São Paulo. Instead of planting vulnerable monocultures, he created complex agroforestry systems that intercrop commercial crops with natural repellent plants. I discovered that ants avoid areas where there is diversity of aromatic plants. Today I have rows of coffee intercropped with neem, eucalyptus, mint, and other plants that function as natural barriers. The results were impressive. Campos's farm, which previously spent thousands of dollars annually on ant poisons, reduced control costs by 90%. More importantly, productivity increased due to general improvement in soil health and increased local biodiversity. The third front of the revolution came through precision technology. Drones equipped with infrared cameras began to be used to map ant hills with millimeter precision. Soil sensors detect underground colony activity before ants even appear on the surface. Artificial intelligence analyzes behavior patterns and predicts where new attacks will occur. Agricultural engineer Fernando Costa developed a monitoring system that revolutionized management. We can detect a new colony 48 hours before it starts attacking plantations. This gives us enough time to implement targeted preventive measures, using only the necessary amount of biological control. The revolution also incorporated traditional knowledge that had been despised by industrial agriculture. Indigenous peoples and ancient rural communities always coexisted with leafcutter ants without using chemical pesticides. They used companion plants, crop rotation, and management techniques that kept ant populations under natural control. Dona Antonia, an 80-year-old family farmer, shared knowledge that her family had used for generations. My grandfather always planted marigolds and basil around the garden. He said ants didn't like the smell. We never had serious problems. When the poisons arrived, everyone abandoned these practices, but now they're coming back to us to learn. The economic impact of this transformation has been extraordinary. Farms that adopted integrated management report reductions of up to 80% in ant control costs, increased productivity due to improved soil health, and access to premium markets that value pesticide-free products. More importantly, the environment is responding positively. Areas that were once biological deserts due to intensive pesticide use have again begun to show diversity of beneficial insects, birds, and other animals. Rivers and springs are being gradually decontaminated. The green revolution against leafcutter ants proves that sustainable solutions are not only possible, but are more effective and economical than conventional methods. This transformation represents a fundamental change in how we approach agriculture, from a war against nature to an intelligent partnership with it. Today, thousands of producers around the world are implementing these innovative strategies. What began as an apparently unsolvable problem has transformed into an opportunity to revolutionize agriculture, creating systems that are more sustainable, productive, and harmonious with the environment. The battle against leafcutter ants has taught us that nature is not our enemy to be conquered, but rather our teacher to be understood. And when we learn its lessons, we discover solutions that benefit not only our production, but the entire ecosystem of which we are part. This is a revolution that is just beginning, and you can be part of it by implementing these strategies on your property or supporting producers who have chosen the path of sustainability. Producers around the world are implementing these innovative strategies. What began as a seemingly unsolvable problem has turned into an opportunity to revolutionize agriculture, creating more sustainable, productive, and environmentally harmonious systems. The battle against leafcutter ants has taught us that nature is not our enemy to be conquered, but rather our teacher to be understood. And when we learn its lessons, we discover solutions that benefit not only our production, but the entire ecosystem of which we are a part. This is a revolution that is just beginning, and you can be part of it by implementing these strategies on your property or supporting producers who have chosen the path of sustainability.